Hello, welcome to this lesson video for simplifying rational expressions. That's what our learning target will be. Not only are we going to look at simplifying, but we're also going to throw in some more examples of finding the domain as well. Okay, so let's get started. I gave this its own screen because it's important. Something is completely simplified if the numerator and denominator have no common factors. So a rule that we've talked about and you've learned back in elementary school is if you have a fraction and there's something the same on the top and bottom, you are allowed to cross it out as long as it's not zero, obviously. And we're actually going to use this reduction rule with our rational expressions. And up here I have the steps of how to simplify, and the first step says to completely factor your numerator and denominator. So we've had some reminders of how to factor. Think of X puzzles, think divide and slide, think factoring out the GCF. And this numerator, you might be tempted to do an X puzzle, but actually it's simply just a GCF. Both terms on the top share an X, so I factor it out. And then what I'm left with after I take an X away from everything is X plus 2 on the top. And the denominator both share X squared. Each have two X's that they could give. So when I take away two X's, each term on the bottom is left with X minus 2. Okay? Now one important thing that we should talk right off the bat about is the roles of X. Here in the parentheses, X plus 2 or X minus 2, I like to say that this X is married. So the X and the 2, they're married, whether they're added or subtracted. And this X on the outside that we factored out, that's a loner X, okay? It's single, it's not married. So you can only cross out things that are alike that are married. So like if these both were X plus 2s, I could have crossed them out. But since they're different, I can't. But these loner X's, I've got a single loner X on top and I've got two loner X's on the bottom. So I'm actually going to cross out one of them, okay? The one on the top cancels with one of them on the bottom, so that leaves me with, instead of X squared, just a single X on the bottom, okay? So this would be my simplified fraction. I'm stuck with X plus 2 on the top, and then I've only got a single loner X with X minus 2 on the bottom. Okay, and the directions say just to simplify, so I'm done. Next up, again, I want to completely simplify, and this guy's going off the screen. There we go. So I'm going to start with the top, and we talked about this in class. This is actually an X puzzle where you have a -9 and a 0 on the bottom, because remember there's understood to be a 0x in the middle. That's why it's missing. What two numbers multiply to -9 and add to 0? Well, that would be a -3 and a +3. So those two numbers will give me my two groups for the top. And the denominator is also another X puzzle. So this X puzzle down here, -6, and remember the middle is a -1. So what two numbers multiply -6, add to -1? A -3 and a 2. Excuse me. So when I write my groups, X minus 3, X plus 2, all of my X's are married with a number. So I'm looking for two married groups that are the same, if you will, top and bottom. And I've got X minus 3's. So that's a common factor that I can cancel out. And therefore my final simplified fraction is simply X plus 3 over X plus 2. And there's my answer. Example C, again, is just two more X puzzles on the top and bottom. I think for the sake of time, I might skip over this one and go to D. Now, I'm looking at the top, and I see a 3 in front of the X squared, so I might be thinking, divide and slide. But since there's only two terms, and if you look closely, you'll notice they both share a factor of 3, and they both have an X. So this is actually a GCF as far as factoring. So what I'm left with is an X plus 2. The denominator is the same thing. It's a GCF. They all have an X that I could take away. And let's see what I'm left with when I take out an X. I'm looking at what I'm left with in the parentheses, and that looks really familiar. You know what? I usually do X puzzles for things that look like that. So let's see if I can factor that even more. So what multiplies to 8 and adds to 6? Well, a 4 and 2 works, don't they? So here's the actual denominator. The loner x with an x plus 4 times x plus 2. And then obviously the top I can carry over. So now I'm looking for things that are the same. Oh, I've got a single x on top and bottom, so I can cross those out. And I've got x plus 2, x plus 2. I can cross those out. Remember, one has to be on top, one has to be on the bottom to cross it out. So what I'm left with is simply a 3 on top and an x plus 4. And there would be my simplified expression. Okay, cool beans. Now this next part, we're going to throw in simplifying and finding the domain. Okay, and I have a note here. The domain must contain excluded values that are present before we start crossing stuff out. So let me demonstrate what I'm talking about. Since I'm going to have to simplify, let's go ahead and factor the top and bottom. So the top requires an X puzzle. So what multiplies to negative 15 adds to a 2? Well, that would be a 5 and a negative 3. So that's my numerator. Now the denominator, how would I factor that guy? Well, they just share something. They share a 4, so I'm left with x minus 3. Okay. Now, we've got used to simplifying and we're used to going to crossing stuff out. But because I'm finding the domain, I must find the domain first before I cross anything out. What would give me a 0 at the bottom? Well, in this group x minus 3, if I would plug in a 3 there, that would turn my denominator to a 0, and that would not be good. So my domain is all real numbers, except x cannot be a 3. Okay? Now that I've gotten that taken care of, I'm then allowed to cross stuff out, and my final answer would be x plus 5 over 4. So you see how your denominator drastically changes, and if you wait until after you cross out, that could mean you miss some excluded values, and so obviously that would be incorrect. Okay, so make sure you find the domain first. So this is the same directions. This is an X puzzle top and bottom. I think I'm going to go ahead and skip to this one just for the sake of time, shorten the video for you. And something cool happens in example G. To factor the top, it's a GCF. They both share a 3x, so let me take that away, and I'd be left with x minus 6. Now the denominator, it kind of looks like an X puzzle, but everything's backwards. But the most important thing to notice, in front of your x squared is a negative 1. You cannot have that negative 1 in front of your x squared and be able to do an X puzzle. So take a look at this trick that I'm going to do. I'm kind of going to do two things at once. I'm going to factor out a negative 1 from everything, and I'm going to go backwards forwards, okay? So when I take away the negative 1 from x squared, it turns him positive. Factoring out a negative 1 from this 11 just makes it minus 11x. And oh, I remember something I wanted to do. I have a typo in my original. Let me change it to a negative 30 originally. So then that way, when I factor out that negative 1, it turns it into positive 30. I almost forgot about that. Okay? So all basically what happened is just changed the signs and reordered how it was written. Okay? And the reason I changed the sign was because of that negative 1 out front. By doing that, I've made this guy applicable for an X puzzle. And so when I figure out this X puzzle, multiplies to 30, adds to negative 11, negative 6 and negative 5. Did you see my typo? X puzzle wouldn't have worked if I didn't go and change that. Okay. So now here's what we've got. On the denominator, we have that negative 1, that loner negative 1 that we took out. And from my X puzzle, I'm going to make these two groups, x minus 6, x minus 5. Okay? And then on the top, I'm just going to carry over what I've got. Now the directions say find the domain, so I must do that first before I cross anything out. That -1 outside won't affect me. Here, if I would plug in a 6, so everything except a 6 would be bad. And here, if I plugged in a 5 would be bad. Okay, so my domain's taken care of now. So now is the fun part. This is my favorite part of rationals, crossing stuff out. They both have an x minus 6 top and bottom. So then what I'm left with, 3x on top, -1 times the group x minus 5 on the bottom. All right, I think I've just got one more to show you. Yeah, this guy. Same direction, simplify and find the domain. Now this numerator, blah, cannot use an x puzzle because of that 3. So we have to divide and slide. So remember the first step to divide and slide, and I'm going to go quick for the time's sake for you. Multiply the first times the last, and so we get x squared plus 17x plus 30. Okay, so now with this rewrite, I'm able to do an x puzzle. 30 and 17. What multiplies to 30 and adds to 17? That would be a 15 and a 2. So then x plus 15, x plus 2. Remember, don't stop here though. Divide and slide, you have to divide by that first number, 3. And so my new groups would be x plus 5. And then this guy doesn't divide or simplify, so I have to slide 3x plus 2. Okay, so this is my numerator. X plus 5, that's a bad 5, sorry, 3x plus 2. The denominator is a GCF. The greatest thing that both share is a 4x squared, so I'd be left with 3x plus 2. Now remember, I have to go and find the domain first. So in this group, can I look at that and tell? I can't. So let me do some scratch work, and off to the side, let me take that group and set it equal to 0. And then when I solve this, it kind of does the dirty work for me and tells me my exclusion. Everything works except x cannot be -2/3 from my little quick trick over here. And then we've got a loner x out here. Actually, we have 2 of them. One thing that's important to realize, 4 is being multiplied by this x squared. So is there a number that I could plug in for this x and it could turn this part into a 0? 4 times a 0 would turn to a 0, and that would wipe out the whole thing as well. So when you've got loner x's, you automatically have an excluding value of 0. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. Okay? Loner x's mean in your domain, you automatically have a 0 you have to account for. Now it's the fun part though. The things that are the same I can cross out, 3x plus 2. So then the simplified answer, x plus 5 over 4x squared. Okay. Remember your preview problems for homework, and I will see you in class next time. Have a great night.